welcome to Mooney Reads, and welcome to a reading wrap-up. I'm going to be talking about the books that I've read so far in the first quarter of 2026. That means January, February, March. The first part of the video, I'll just talk about the books that I'm reading or have been reading, and then the second part is where I'll talk a little bit more about my goals, book journaling, reading challenges, and that sort of stuff. So far, I've read 13 books and have kept up roughly with the half fiction, half nonfiction from that was similar to last year. Although, interestingly, my fiction has skewed much younger in like graphic novels, which is cool. I've read a lot of really good middle grade graphic novels. So I'm just going to go through and chronologically talk about the books that I read this year so far. Starting off, the first book that I finished this year was a kid's book, Bigfoot's Big Heart, by Sarah Glenn Marsh, which is just a kid's picture book that's about Valentine's Day, but also like friendships. It's a wholesome cryptid book. It was cute and a nice little pick-me-up. The only other book that I finished in January was Fawning, Why the Need to Please Makes Us Lose Ourselves and How to Find Our Way Back by Dr. Ingrid Clayton. And I actually listened to this on audiobook throughout the month and then had to go out and get a copy. And I've been, I initially wrote down the quotes that I had tabbed while reading, which is difficult to do with only the audiobook because I bought it way after the fact. And kind of wrote down some of the quotes so that I could find them in the book. So I've been kind of skim reading and rereading certain sections, which is ongoing, and I don't think it will count as a reread, but I've been really trying to kind of sit with this. This is about the fawn response. So for those unfamiliar, you have fight or flight, I think is the most well-known, like trauma responses. But if you look at it more closely, there's fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. I think the first time I heard it, it was fight, flight, freeze, appease, in case you like rhyming more than similar first letters. But this is written by a therapist who has worked with a lot of people with CPTSD and also has CPTSD. With the consent of the people that she worked with, she used pieces of their story to talk about the different ways that people experience fawning. She talks about how different things can be traumatic for different people. It's less about what happened to you and it's more about how your body reacts, and then goes into a lot of the specifics of like the examples of people's fawning, but also like why it happens, how it is a defense mechanism that has kept people safe, but also how to step out of that mechanism when it no longer serves you. It goes without saying that I liked it because I went out and I bought a copy after listening to the audiobook, so that should tell you enough. Getting into February's reads, the first book that I read was Welcome to the Grief Club, which I borrowed from the library, and I will likely get a copy of it because I really liked this one. This is about grieving, and it goes into how people basically grieve very differently. There are a lot of different emotions that people can experience at different times, different processes that people might go through, and what might be helpful. It's a pretty simple book. It uses a lot of illustrations, and I think that the way that it's formatted is really approachable. I think that's what made it really so good. I personally have a tendency when I'm dealing with something, I feel like if I can get a firm grasp on the problem, that somehow fixes the problem, which isn't how anything works. But I bought a number of grief books that I haven't actually read, and I think part of it is because they're too in the weeds, even though I think the weeds are going to fix things. And this one, in its simplicity, was really kind of what I needed, and I wish that I would have picked it up much earlier. But yeah, it was simple, but ultimately really helpful. After that, I finished Bug Boys Volume 1. I had borrowed this from the library on Libby. I had actually read like probably half of it in January, and then I finished the rest early in February. And it was pretty cute. It's a middle grade graphic novel that's like serial or like episodic, looking at these two bug boys who are friends. It was really cute. It had some parts that were, I think, really thoughtful, and did engage with larger themes. I do think that maybe I'm not the biggest fan of more episodic type of graphic novels, because I think it feels less smooth. And for this one, I feel like the character development, or my maybe experience of the character development, was kind of impacted. But it is also a middle grade graphic novel at the end of the day too, so like, I don't know, it was cute. I liked it for what it was. After that, I finished the ADHD Focus Friend Planning and Productivity Workbook. This looks a lot bigger than it actually is. The first half of this is actually the book, and then the second half is kind of a planner. And I started this last year. Glad that I got to finish it. It was really helpful, I think, in kind of like understanding parts of ADHD, thinking about how my brain fits into some of that. And this is another one where like it's simple and it's laid out well. And that's why it's effective. That's why I liked it and why it was helpful. I've kind of used the planner part of it, but not a ton. I think the fact that it's attached to the book is not ideal for me personally, and I've tried to remedy that by like writing it out in a different journal and trying to use it that way. Thus far, it hasn't been super successful, but I think that says more about me and my inability to use a planner than it does about the setup of this. But I will continue to try. One day I might pick up a planner more than like 2 days in a row every 3 weeks. Overall, I would recommend it though. I really do like the bulk of the book. The next 2 books I finished as a part of my kind of shorty reading. I've had a goal of reading poems, short stories, and essays, and kind of sitting with them, journaling about them, and going slowly through more works rather than just sitting and reading a whole collection at once. The first one that I finished, I actually read the bulk, or not the bulk of it, probably about half of it a few years ago, and then since it's an essay collection, it's easy to put down and pick back up. But that is Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde. And this was an incredible collection overall. I definitely remember pieces that I read in previous years, and I mean, some of them are just like iconic. I know I've read them multiple times for different classes, and have used at least one of them in a class that I've taught before. One of the big standouts from my reading more recently was the essay where she is kind of reflecting on the 60s while in the 80s. She wrote it in the 80s, but was reflecting on 60s activism. And I thought that so many of her points, both the positives and the critique, were still really relevant to today, which also says something about the place that we were at in the 80s versus now, which that in and of itself is something I've been looking a lot at with my kind of trips through looking more closely at activism around the AIDS epidemic. So that was really neat and really impactful. And I mean, it's a collection that I knew would be great, and it was. And then the other book that I read that was a part of my kind of short reading was Blessing the Boats by Lucille Clifton. This is the poetry collection that I started this whole kind of short reading goal experiment with. So it was really exciting to finish my first one with it. And it was really good. I bought this because I had read Generations, which is Lucille Clifton's memoir. That one was a memoir. It was narrative rather than poetry. But it was the sort of the sort of writing that you can tell that a poet wrote it. And I thought that the way that she chose to write it was so interesting and profound, because it's not just a memoir about her, like the title would suggest. She goes back generations reflecting on different people within her family. So that is why I really wanted to read some of her poetry, and it absolutely did not disappoint. These poems were really powerful. They range throughout a lot of different topics, going from her personal life and experiences of trauma to kind of taking biblical concepts and stories and looking at them in a unique way. There are parts of this where the poet, like, she'll have several poems kind of going through a similar topic or similar theme, or they'll play off of each other. And I thought that the decision to order the poems in the way that she did was really neat too, because the first section is the newest poetry, but then after that you go to the oldest poetry and then kind of make your way back up. And I think that also tells a really interesting story about her as a writer. So yeah, overall this was great. And that's it for February. So that's 2 books for January, 5 books for February, and then in March I read 6 improvements. The first book that I finished was After Silence, A History of AIDS Through Its Images by Avram Finkelstein. This one is one that is on my AIDS and art personal curriculum that I'm trying to do. And I'm so glad that this is one of the first ones that I picked up for this project that I'm doing this year, or the first one that I finished, at any rate. Avram Finkelstein was one of the creators of the iconic Silence Equals Death poster. He created this alongside a group of other people in kind of an unnamed collective, at least a year before ACT UP was even created, which is interesting because I think that Silence Equals Death is always associated with ACT UP, and it's assumed to be created by ACT UP members, and it kind of was created by the members because some of the members of that collective would go on to go into ACT UP, but it happened beforehand, and then ACT UP would go on to use it. He was also in Grand Fury, who did a lot of really iconic art activism, like the Read My Lips posters, Kissing Doesn't Kill, Greed and Indifference Do, which was actually plastered on buses. The cover of this has a part of one of their other art pieces. They did a lot, and this book ends up being partly a description of that history. It has how they came to make the pieces in certain ways, like certain things that were chosen by certain people or that they went back and forth about. He also talks about himself as an artist throughout this, and the way that, like, his relationship with art and what art is, how it shifted, and how it was kind of shown in his artwork. But you also get very kind of intimate pieces as well. He talks about how he even came to his initial collective in the first place, describing the loss of his first great love to AIDS. And then he would mention kind of other people throughout his life. And towards the beginning of this, he has a really beautiful and harrowing description of grief, especially coming from his perspective as a Jewish person who was born just after the Holocaust, and how that sort of informed his grief process or understanding of grief. So there are a lot of layers to this book and a lot of reasons that I really liked it. And I think one of the big reasons that I'm glad that I read this first is the way that he talked about these instances of art as action. We're not looking at art as in high art, like what gets put in galleries. This is looking at how people are using graphic mediums to act and to encourage other people to act. And the fact that just because one piece of art is done, that doesn't mean, once it becomes an object that its thing is done, but rather instead to see it as an action and to try to understand the things that made it and the things that happened around it, and the fact that you can continue those things and push forward these different movements to actually make social change happen. And this is really the focus of what he continues to do as well, working sort of with flash collectives, with art that's more geared towards social change. But yeah, this was excellent. After that, I started some reading for the Trans Rights Readathon. And the first book that I finished was I Shall Never Fall in Love by Hari Connor, which is an Austen-inspired historical fiction that focuses on this sort of group of friends. We have Eleanor and her cousin Charlotte, as well as their friend George. And we're seeing them as they're more or less coming of age. We see a little bit in their childhood, but then the first kind of big thing that we focus on is this ball that they end up having to go to. George's aunt is basically begging them to go attempt to find a husband or be a part of public life, and of course they want nothing to do with it. They are now in charge of their family's estate and could not care about boys or a husband if they wanted to. However, Charlotte is kind of actually interested in meeting people. And then Eleanor kind of likes the idea of it, and mostly I think likes the idea of spending time together just with the three of them. And then from there, they all end up learning different lessons. I'm not going to go super in detail with the plot because it's a graphic novel. I feel like it's really easy to get into spoilery territory. But overall, I really liked it. I thought that it looked at queerness historically really well. I think that they did a pretty good job of talking about how racism can exist within friendships, but also how to, like, it talks about the process of, like, accountability and different things like that when you realize you've done the wrong thing. And overall, I really liked the artwork, so great time overall. From there, I read several things from the library, specifically that I got through Libby. I had read The Tea Dragon Society quite a while ago, so I finally got around to reading The Tea Dragon Festival and The Tea Dragon Tapestry. The Tea Dragon Festival is a bit of a prequel to the Tea Dragon Society, and then the Tea Dragon Tapestry is more of a follow-up to the first book. And overall, they were really cute. I do think that the Tea Dragon Tapestry was a little bit stronger, but overall, they were really cute and also tackled some important topics and themes, but without being too heavy. I mostly just want the artwork all over my house. Like, there's something about Kay O'Neill's art in general that is just so soothing to me. Like, I'm still waiting for something to, like, get me like the Moth Keeper did. Just because even down to the color palette, it was just so everything. So anyways, Kay O'Neill is great. And finishing up the Tea Dragon Society trilogy was really nice. After that, I read Lunar Boy, another middle grade graphic novel. This one is more science fiction. The main character is a trans boy who was found as a child on a moon, by a space explorer. He starts off kind of growing up on this spaceship. Eventually, he has to move to New Earth because his mom is getting married, and he now has step-siblings and a stepdad, and the book is really about change, dealing with change, and how the fact that different people deal with it. So, big themes of grief in a lot of different ways. Actual grieving, because everyone but the main character is having to grieve the person that the stepdad used to be married to, who was the mom's best friend who passed away way before the story starts, and then just generally grief of change. And the way that, like, I had a lot of thoughts about the role that the moon played in the story, because he's taken from the moon, but the moon also calls to him in these different ways, in that it is trying to keep him safe on some level, keep him there, but also, I think it's also a metaphor for passive suicidal ideation, or maybe just suicidal ideation at large. And that was very powerful, very powerful. On top of that, it was really neat to see how much the story really showed Southeast Asian culture. They had fashion, even in the language. There were different things about gender and different rites of passage from different parts of the culture. So that was really cool as well. I also like the fact that there was a lot about queer family in queer history. There was a richness that was obvious, but also the hard stuff was there. So it wasn't like it was able to, again, kind of handle the hard stuff, while also showing a lot of the positive. I also really loved the art in this one. There was a bit of a pastel color palette that I really liked that went through parts of it. There were also nods to things like the Little Prince throughout some of it, and I don't know, there were just a lot of cool details. And the final book that I finished in March was Hijab Butch Blues by Lamya H. I listened to this on audiobook, although I do own a physical copy and will likely be rereading it because it was really excellent. This is a memoir by someone who is from an unnamed Arab country who grew up mostly in a different one. So they migrated when they were very young. And then after high school, migrated to the United States for college and continues to live there. They talk about growing up queer, growing up racialized, and they end up showing different parts of their lives while relating it to different characters in the Quran. And a lot of the specific things that they show have overlap with the theme of the person who they're focused on, and often also involves them either talking about how they learned about this person or how their perspective of this particular figure changed at some point. So I really love this. I love a memoir that has a unique setup like that. The only thing similar I could even think of is How Far the Light Reaches, and their kind of personal essays line up with different sea creatures. But this one, everything in Hijab Butch Blues feels so much more personal because it's about religion. So not an exact comparison, but regardless, I really love the way that they were able to tie all of it together. So they end up talking about a lot throughout the course of this memoir, but a few things that stood out to me: the way that their life didn't line up with even the typical queer timeline. Like their experience of coming out or what that looks like is not linear and not even like a given. The whole concept of coming out as a whole is flawed for so many people, and this shows exactly why. Another thing that really that I thought about a lot while reading this were the stories from the Quran themselves. I think I could identify all but maybe the first story in terms of Bible stories. I grew up Christian in the South, so I knew most of the stories that she told, just with slightly different names. So it was really neat to be able to see different takes on some of these stories from like a theological perspective, I guess, but also like as a queer person who grew up in a religious environment, and seeing how other queer experiences are like resonated within, or how another queer person would like resonate with these different stories. There was so much more in the memoir, but those are just a couple of things that stood out to me. And so it was really great. So that's it for the wrap up portion of everything. I did want to talk a little bit in terms of reading goals, what I've been doing. Starting out with a little bit of an update on my shorty reading plan. A big goal of mine was to read short pieces more intentionally. I have a journal sort of dedicated to that, and it has gone successful in terms that I have finished a couple of collections. I have had periods where I've done it every day. I have sort of fallen off the last part of March, and it's been a little bit more spotty in March in general, but I was also focused on the Trans Rights Readathon, and also on kind of trying not to lose it, so like that went by the wayside some, but I think overall I've been doing pretty well with it. And while I haven't been reading like a million pages a day, I do think that I've read pretty consistently. In terms of other reading challenges and stuff like that, I don't think I'll go super into the weeds on each individual one, because maybe I'll do that more at the halfway point of the year or something like that, just because it'd be kind of a lot for like a quarterly thing. But one that I did want to focus on was the Anti Brainrot Reading Challenge, because there are so many more interesting goals within it. And this whole bit kind of goes with the reading and annotating. But another big part of that is doing a media journal. And I have been doing pretty well with this. I have written about every book that I've read. I haven't as much with movies. I have done some of them. For instance, I did some musical rewatching that I wrote like a little bit about, but then I did like a creative spread about it, and this was in January. And then I think I have one more about movies. I think I just summarized what I watched in February. And honestly, I might do that for March too, because I accidentally left like an extra page that's a little bit awkward, so that's probably what I'll do. But I did do kind of a cute spread with the graphic novels that I read in March. I printed off, like some of them I was able to screenshot because I was reading them on Hoopla, or not Hoopla, the other one, Libby. So, and then the other ones I just like found online and printed off. Just some little bits that I liked. I thought that was cool. One thing that's been important for me in terms of this reading journal, but also a lot of like the art stuff that I've done and journaling stuff, is just to kind of let myself do things without overthinking them, and without kind of putting that like perfectionism that rots my brain a lot of the time. So it's been really fun, kind of not just, writing a ton about it, but also being able to have this extra part of it too. Another big goal that I had set up for myself was my personal curriculums. Now, I set up my personal curriculums with kind of a timeline in mind, but not a super strict one, because if I did that, I probably would have read and done absolutely nothing. But I have been chipping away at some of them. So the cooking one, I have started. I've read through the first course in Start Here, and I've made one of the recipes. I would really like to practice, I guess I have generally practiced the principles in some of the other cooking that I've done, because the way that I've used spices is like a little bit different. I'd like to make at least one or maybe two other recipes from this section before moving on to the next chapter. I haven't really done too much with my prehistoric nature one in this first quarter, but that just means I have that to look forward to. In terms of my AIDS in Art personal curriculum, which is my top priority out of the three, to be honest. I did finish After Silence, and I have started in on the conference that I want to watch along with this. Specifically, I watched the first panel, which includes Avram Finkelstein, who wrote this book, and that was really good. I've done my journal entries, haven't done the wholly annotated bibliography bit yet, but there's still plenty of time. I think moving on into the rest of the year, I would basically like to continue to focus on the same things that I laid out towards the beginning. I want to get back into my short reading. I want to focus in on my personal curriculums, especially the AIDS and art one, and continue to have a good time with my reading journals and stuff like that. So, that is my reading lately. A big baby. A big baby. Do you just want attention? Or is it dinner time? I think it's dinner time. In terms of videos and stuff, I would definitely like to make more. In the second quarter, I didn't even stop to look at how many I've put up, but I'm sure it's probably like, if I had ballpark 5. I'll see if I'm right. I'm in the middle of editing my 2025 nonfiction favorites, so that will be good. But yeah, I'm just kind of rambling at this point, but that is what the first quarter of the year looked like. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these and how your reading year has been so far. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.